I love you, California. You're the greatest state of all. I love you in the winter.
Welcome to California Centric. CalCentric is a production of the Independent California Institute. We look at California from the inside out. Hello, I'm Jean Rosenmeyer, and this is California Centric. We're going to end the suspense now about what are the 13 things that California could do without permission from the federal government to earn more autonomy and take steps on the way to potential home rule.
We did hit this record high result. 71% of Californians said we'd be better off with special autonomous status. And I think there's a lot that we can do with that, and there's a lot we can do with that right now. The first poll we ran was really just to find out people sort of where Californians were at on independence. So it's just about these general overall questions and these like, how are you feeling about, how this would affect water in California. And in the second poll, we asked a bunch of questions about specific policies, like should California do this? Should our state government do this? And in this third poll, we asked even more questions. And we found that there are actually 13 things Californians could do right now with our state government without needing permission from anybody that are very popular. In some sense, my thinking is we pass the independence referendum, what's the next step? Then we try to get them to the negotiating table. Then we negotiate for more autonomy. What if we just skip ahead? What if we just get more autonomy? What if we just start 80% of people, California, want us to control our state borders like a country. So California actually already controls its borders with other states, but it's only to keep out agricultural pests. And we could be using those to say, check for illegal guns. That's probably the most important one. But there are a number of other things that are contraband in California. And we could have, hard borders that we control with other states. We could keep people who buy a semi-automatic rifle with a bump stock in Nevada from just driving it into California. Right now, we don't. So it's very, very popular. And it even basically has a majority of people saying, definitely we should do that. The next one is doubling the size of a rainy day fund. That's an actual legislative proposal, though I think the legislatures held it over for the next year. It hasn't advanced this year. This one, let county supervisors remove sheriffs. So sheriffs are elected county officials, and so are county supervisors. And the problem we run into with sheriffs is we get sheriffs elected who are like, I know we have these limits on immigration enforcement, but I'm going to do whatever I can to help out ICE. And you can't do anything about it except vote for a new sheriff, because they're an elected official. They consider themselves co-equal with the county board of supervisors. Californians don't want that. About 3/4 of Californians say the county supervisor should have the last word on what the sheriff can do and if they stay in office. There's about 3/4 of Californians say we should create a path to state citizenship. States have always been able to define their own citizenship. And since the 14th Amendment was passed, everyone who's a US citizen who lives in a state is automatically a state citizen. So we don't think about it very much, but it's certainly possible for California to say, these other people who live in California are also state citizens, and we protect our citizens. We're going to, if other states discriminate against them, that violates their constitutional rights, and we're going to back them. This one is interesting, closing the equal protection loophole. So I don't know how many of you remember the same-sex marriage ban, Prop 8 in 2008. Basically, it was a situation where there was a ballot initiative, a law passed that banned same-sex marriage. And our California Supreme Court came back and said, no, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. It violates equal protection. And so the people who sponsored that law were like, well, why don't we just write it into the Constitution with another initiative? So like they knew it was wrong. They knew it violated equal protection, and they were like, well, we'll just push it through anyway. And what happened is it took the federal courts to say, yes, this violates equal protection because our state courts' hands were tied. So essentially, we're in a situation where, at least with respect to the ballot initiative, Californians are dependent on the federal court system to uphold equal protection. And at this point, I think there's no reason we should trust them to do that. So it makes California's equal protection autonomous, separate from the federal government. This is one that's been getting a lot of press. 72% of Californians think we should arrest immigration agents if they commit a crime and it's legal to do so. The limit on federal authority is, is it actually within their job description? Like, would a reasonable person think that they're allowed to do that? And are they not acting maliciously or with criminal intent? So the question is phrased very much to follow case law. We're not saying like, haha, we can just arrest whoever we want. We're saying like, every government operates within limits. The federal government's authority only goes so far, and if they go farther than that, they hurt people, that's a crime, and we can stop them. This is to strengthen our sanctuary state laws. So right now, there are laws that say like state officials can't collaborate with immigration enforcement, except in very specific circumstances. But there's no punishment for doing it. There's nothing like you're not going to get fined or anything if you do that. And this is saying like, well, maybe if somebody takes an action that they weren't supposed to do and results in some family losing one of their family members and not being able to support themselves, they should be able to sue the official that caused that to happen. And Californians are pretty supportive of that. There's a few more. Californians want to create a new state law enforcement division to deal with violent extremism and hate crimes. And the question is phrased like, so that we're not dependent on the FBI to do that. Because that is what the FBI, one of the major things the FBI does for us. And I don't think Californians can trust them anymore to do that at this point. This one's interesting. We asked people if they wanted to recapture the Trump tax cuts. So we have the situation where the federal government extended the Trump tax cuts forever, indefinitely, and then cut major social services, including Medicaid. And so we're in the situation where like the federal government isn't funding Medicaid enough, and we're going to have to kick people off. And it's a state-run, federally funded program. And so it's like, well, but we don't believe in the Trump tax cuts, right? Like, at the very least, people who have plenty of money should, if they're not going to pay it to the federal government, they should pay it to the state. And people are pretty broadly supportive of that. People liked the idea of creating a sovereign wealth fund for universal basic income. So this is like the Alaska Permanent Fund, where there's a chunk of money that's invested and every resident of the state gets a dividend every year. People like the idea of creating a permanent commission to get California more autonomy. They endorsed this idea to change the state contracting rules so we'd make sure that everyone who lives in the United States and works for a company that contracts with California can access an abortion, even if they have to travel to another state to do it. And it's pretty minimally invasive. Like, if the company doesn't cover their employees, the state would just put money aside in a fund, and that would figure into the price of the contract. And finally, this one it's 56% want a policy of total non-collaboration with immigration enforcement. So right now, we have a policy of mostly not collaborating, and that gets majority support, but it's a lot weaker than these other things. So people are still like, there's still some nuance there. That is what I want to present to you. I have a bunch of other graphs to show you, but I would rather get into those graphs in order to answer questions.
Is there a difference between the answers of men and women in the poll?
I didn't see any, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
In our first poll, we looked and we said like there might be a gender gap in terms of who supports independence, but could also just be statistical noise. And I think it turned out it was. When we've looked, and I've got to say, I haven't done the full demographic analysis on this poll data yet. I've been very focused on what are called top line results, the overall results. But when we've looked at demographics, the things that actually seem to be real and not just statistical noise are age. So younger people are more supportive of independence, political affiliation, people who were identified as conservative or Republican or voted for Donald Trump are much, much less supportive of independence than the general population. Like, it's a really big gap. And surprisingly, people who didn't vote for president are actually kind of the same as people who voted for the Democratic candidate. And that's pretty much it, age and politics. And I've got to say, like, because our poll has a pretty small sample size, we have to see some pretty big differences between populations before we can be certain that it's not just noise. So I think we have to see like a 12% difference typically, but it depends on how small the population is, how small the subpopulation is. So, for example, if you want to draw conclusions about Black people in California, like that's really hard because it's not the very big percentage of Californians overall. So the margin of error is much bigger. Whereas if you're asking about Democrats, self-identified Democrats are like 40% of the population. So the margin of error isn't that much bigger, and you could see these things. So that's part of what's going on.
And that's it for this episode of California Centric. You can get more information about the poll results and more granular detail on our website at ic.institute. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
I love your redwood forest, love your fields of yellow grain.
California Centric is sponsored by the Independent California Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit think tank working to broaden and deepen democracy for California, including exploring the possibility of home rule. Besides this program, Independent California Institute also publishes a weekly newsletter of California-focused news, as well as doing original research and polling. Visit our website at ic.institute to see polling results, articles, our newsletter archives, and of course, archives and show notes for this program. That's ic.institute. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
It is here nature gives of her rarest. It is home, sweet home to me. And I know when I die I shall breathe my last sigh for my sunny